Oh, here we are back at Coalition Purple.
Yep.
How's life?
It's good. Things are moving along. Fires are still raging in some places,
And
but
more of them.
yep. And
More of them.
it seems like every day some other one pops up somewhere that you have to be concerned about. But so far, at least for me personally, I'm getting through it. How about you?
Yep. So far, so good. So I got it on this week. Oh, it's backwards. At least on my side. Got to wear that merch.
Yep.
And good for you. You gave me a large, and normally I wear an extra large. But what's good about that is I need to lose 20 pounds, and then I'll fit into a large. So I've now got motivation. I've lost 4 so far.
Hey, that's good. That's a good way to start the new year.
Well, I bulked up for the winter, and
Yeah. You get ready to hibernate.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so now I'm coming out of hibernation, even though it's not even February yet. It's we're living in Southern California, so
yeah,
we're getting past winter.
Yeah. Well, it's been weird. It's been hot and windy. A little bit last couple
today was
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I was out for my 4-miler today, and man, I couldn't. It was like at 10 o'clock. And it was like already scorching. It was crazy. So
yeah.
I think it's supposed to be cooling down though. So this weekend should be good. But let me turn off my phone. Anyways, what's going on in the wacky world of politics from your end?
Well, it's funny. There's been so much going on again with the whole transition of things that it's a little bit hard to sort through. But there were a couple things that I wanted to touch on, just to put my ideas about them, sort of out into the universe. And the first one was pardons. I mean, it's like dueling.
That was on my list.
Dueling presidential pardons going on. And, there's all kinds of like details and nitty gritty you could get into. But the thing that's come up, because it's come up for the last couple of transitions, they talked about Trump. He was going to pardon his family members preemptively, and Biden has now preemptively pardoned his family members. But I just wanted to throw out the idea that I don't think a preemptive pardon is a pardon. I think a pardon is a very specific thing. It's like there was a certain offense committed, and then the president comes in and pardons a person for that offense. And I think there's a very logical reason for why it is that way. It's part of the system of checks and balances.
Right.
So if the judiciary oversteps its bounds, the executive has a check on that, which is a pardon. But as part of the checks and balance systems, it's checking something that has happened. It is checking something that was judicial overreach, essentially, or judicial misconduct, or just a bad concept of the way we used to think about things.
Right.
And so pardoning someone for an official act, like what the president did for his son, who was convicted of the gun crime and the IRS stuff, the tax evasion, that he is well within his rights to do such a thing. I do not think the president can confer immunity upon people, because that's essentially what he's doing. He's saying, right, there's no offense, there's no crime, there's nothing going on. I am going to give you immunity for anything that anyone might think of in the future. I don't think that the president can do that. I think it's unconstitutionally vague to have something that just says, oh, you're just pardoned for anything that you might have done in the past 4 years. I don't think that should withstand scrutiny. So originally, I felt like Trump should just leave the Bidens alone. They're done. He's retired. Whatever the hell was going, I mean, it's never going to change. We're never going to just leave it alone. Now, I think he has to go after a Biden or a Cheney or a Adam Schiff somewhere to challenge this idea that the president now has the ability to confer immunity onto people, because I think that is a terrible precedent.
No, the whole pardon thing has just gotten totally out of whack. And I'm trying to remember, didn't Trump pardon Bannon before he actually got sentenced or found guilty?
I don't know.
I think there was like 1 or 2 that he did that with as well. He pardoned them before that actually had been adjudicated. But that's definitely a fact check. I need to fact check that. But yeah, for some reason, I'm thinking he did. I know he pardoned some people that were already in jail.
Yeah.
and obviously he just pardoned a whole bunch of people,
Yeah.
which that's a whole. I think he's constitutionally able to do that, whether ethically and morally and all the other things. I don't know how that fits, but he did it.
Yeah.
So, but I do get your point because this is just going to get into this crazy cycle that from here on out, unless it is clearly defined. Is a pardon really a pardon, or is it you're granting immunity for all
Because
things in the future?
yeah, because here's the thing. So when Trump was on trial for all the various things that he was on trial for, obviously one of the big questions was presidential immunity.
Right.
And it went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court came down with this ruling about the three buckets of things. There's some things that's if it's absolutely spelled out in the Constitution that it's the president's responsibility or part of his authority, then okay, he is immune for that. And then there's a whole nother wide range of things that may or may not be sort of in his responsibility. So he has presumptive immunity, but he'd still have to go through the court trial to figure out whether it is. And then there's a whole bucket of things like murdering people, which he is clearly not immune for. However, if a president has the ability to confer immunity onto himself or anyone else, then he can say, well, I'm just going to pardon myself for anything that you thought I might have done. So I'm going to take this 3 buckets of immunity that presidents may or may not have as far as their duties and turn it into actual complete immunity for everything, because he just says, I'm pardoning myself for anything that I might have done. I now have immunity from everything. And I think what the gift of immunity, quote unquote, pardons are doing are completely overturning what the Supreme Court just said, which is the president isn't actually immune for everything that they do.
Right. Well, but I think that decision was based on the position of president, not necessarily people outside of it, because they
Right.
were talking,
But the
because they were
president can
talking
pardon
about
himself, then he
right,
can confer immunity onto himself and wash away any immunity clauses that there might be have any kind of discussion about. So
right,
as I say, it's essentially creates a power to override, the Supreme Court's authority about what is and isn't constitutional.
right,
It's like, well, I'm not immune to everything. Okay, I pardon myself. Now I am immune to everything. Well, that doesn't make any
right,
sense.
right, right. Oh yeah, no, I totally agree with you. It's definitely a slippery slope. I understand both sides of the equation a bit. That I think we haven't seen it yet, but
Mm-hmm.
all the things that Trump complained about in terms of lawfare and weaponizing this department and that department. If you believe what you read, he's going to start doing the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
And it's like this again. This is where I think independence hopefully can save the day.
Yeah.
It's like all we need is 10 or 15% who really are diehard. We're not going to vote for any of these crazy people, and you basically can really change the election and get people to focus on things that matter. I mean, it was one of the other things, and I didn't listen. And full disclosure, I did not listen to Trump's inauguration speech. I just can't. I couldn't do it. But from what I heard, and little clips here and there, he talked a lot about this whole "we're going to change the world" and all that kind of stuff, which all of them do.
Yeah.
But he didn't really spell out any specifics on things that I think most people are caring about. It's like, okay, what are we going to do to lower the cost of living? What are we going to do to solve the housing crisis? What are we going to do to fix the healthcare system, which is a disaster?
Right.
And so all those big things he didn't even mention during the inauguration speech. Maybe you listened to it. I'm trying to build up the willpower to listen to it. I just can't listen to any of them anymore.
I listened to some of it, and I've heard some highlights. And from what I can tell, I say at this point, I've probably heard the whole thing in bits and pieces. But he does the usual thing where, it's very vague. He just says,
Yeah.
America will be great and everybody will be happy. And so, yes, there were no specifics in it, at least nothing that I heard that was of any particular relevance.
Yeah.
And then he basically just took a dump on top of Biden's head I feel I don't usually feel bad for politicians in any way, but man, Biden having to sit through that, maybe it may be good that he's not aware of what's going on around him, because he really that speech was really just nothing but dumping on Biden.
Yeah.
And then as far as what Trump will do is, solving any actual problems we have, I think the one thing that he's got right is that I believe that inflation is directly related to government spending, and especially government overspending. So if you can start to rein in some of the spending, and you can do something on the economic growth side of things, you can start to get out of this sort of deficit spiral that we're in, at least to some extent. So I think it's kind of like a generalized idea about what to do. We'll see,
Right.
see how it works out. But but it's interesting that you brought up the medical care system. The Republicans and Trump and the Democrats all together have a sum total of 0 ideas how to fix the medical situation that we have.
Yep.
The only person that I see making any headway into doing anything that could help our medical situation is RFK Jr. If he's right about some of the things he says, and like chronic diseases, and how we're poisoning our children and poisoning ourselves with all of this, chemicals that we eat and the environment that we've created for ourselves. And again, there's a lot of research that has to be done. It's very difficult to know some of these things. These are very complex systems that require a lot of thought. But if he's correct, and we can pull back on some of the things that are making people chronically sick, that could have an absolutely gigantic effect on our healthcare system, because you wouldn't be spending trillions of dollars fighting chronic illness as much, because there wouldn't be so many people with chronic illnesses. So if that part of it works out, that could be the single greatest thing that the Trump administration does for this country.
Yeah. Yeah. No. And it's probably the downside of it, I guess, is it's probably almost the most complicated thing to solve.
It's vastly complicated.
It's just like, because all the steps that have been taken up to this point have all been around insurance reform, not healthcare reform.
Right.
And like we've talked about before, all the incentives are in the wrong spot for healthcare. It's like we're not incenting people to be healthy.
Right.
We're incenting people to make sure they have good insurance to pay for when they fall apart. It's like, this is ridiculous.
At some point, at some time, and on some level, your healthcare reform is going to need to address health.
I think that would be a good idea.
Until it does that, you're probably not going to make great progress. I mean, it's nice to say that you want to reform the insurance industry, or you want to, build another clinic somewhere. But until you can actually deal with the health side of healthcare, then you're really not going to make a lot of progress. And again, I really don't know exactly what RFK will do, or what he'll accomplish,
right,
or what he can accomplish even. But there's that little glimmer of hope where if he gets a few things right, and we start to see people being more healthy, well, that's huge. That really would be something great.
Oh no, it'd be transformational. Yeah. And it's the trick, the real parlor trick and all that is to be able to convince a skeptical public that they need to take care of themselves.
Yeah.
Number one. And number two, get all the moneyed interests aligned appropriately. It's like, the insurance companies and the pharmaceutical companies are not going to go down without swinging.
Yeah.
But that's not to say you shouldn't try. And I'm totally concur with you, because that's the only way out of this mess. It's like, I'll hear a lot of them. Bernie Sanders says this all the time about, we need to control pharmaceutical costs and drug costs and, manage all that, which I agree on the surface level of it's way too expensive compared, we're paying so much more here than you do in whatever, Mexico or Europe or whatever. So I get it on that surface level. But really the question before that is, why do we have to have so many people on these drugs all the time, if they were maintaining a healthy lifestyle? And hey, I'm guilty as anybody. I'm not.
Me too.
I'm not pointing fingers at anybody. As I said, I gotta fit into this shirt. So that's the challenge of it. But I hear you.
But as I say, it's one of those things where it's like I don't necessarily expect a lot, but boy, it would sure be great if it worked.
Well, but again, I think that's again where the independents could help, because I think there is, I think there's a lot of people in the middle that aren't happy with the healthcare system, generally speaking. B, they do understand that things like nutrition and exercise and all that, they're all reasonable people, are all good things to be doing.
Yep.
And that could be a leverage point in some of these elections that are coming up, where they say, hey, this is a priority for us. If you want our vote, this is what we need to do. I mean, we
Yep.
just went through the whole we're going through that right now, because I'm on my wife's insurance plan through the school district she works with, and they're still just trying to figure it out. We were with Anthem, and now the basically Anthem and Scripps, where we get most of our health stuff from, they have agreed to disagree. So now it's like,
Now what?
great. So that's where we go. Our doctors are no longer in network and all that stuff. And it's
Yep.
just like, oh my gosh.
Well, that's actually, it's funny that you should bring that up. And this was definitely not something I was expecting to talk about today. But coming from a healthcare background as a physical therapist, one of the big disconnects that is not talked about nearly enough is the disconnect between coverage and care.
Yep.
Now, it's nice that you can say that, you pass a bill that gives everybody coverage, and then you celebrate. You're like, oh, everybody has medical coverage. Problem is that none of the providers accept that coverage. They just reject it out of hand. They're like, there's no way that our practice can survive on the minuscule premiums in place. So goodbye, coverage. And so it's like we created the Obamacare, which I can't
Affordable
remember.
Care Act.
Yeah, the Affordable Care Act. And it created a system where people could get subsidies to buy insurance, but then places don't take that insurance. So where do you find your doctor? Where do you find your provider? And you have places that try and survive on the premiums that are paid by those plans, but they become mills, right? Because
Absolutely.
the reimbursement rates are so low, you have to see like 50 patients a day. Well, is that really medical care?
Right.
And I always go back to the thing, the stat that just always blows my mind, which is life expectancy went down after we passed the Affordable Care Act, the ultimate measure of health, right? Life expectancy. Yeah. So everybody starts living a shorter period of time. So what did we really do? We created this huge economic mess to provide people with coverage, which doesn't actually provide them with care, and then everybody dies sooner. So,
right.
I mean, that picture does not look good to me.
Well, some of that was due to COVID too, though, I think, right?
No, the life expectancy went down, within a couple of years.
Before COVID?
Yeah, even before COVID.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it when it happened.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I'm interested in following Mark Cuban's really pushing this idea. Basically, it's self-insurance among larger companies anyways, but they're cutting out the middle layer, the pharmacy benefit managers and all that stuff, right? And he's got it where basically, and of course they've got scale to do this, where they're just cutting that out and going directly to the clinics and doctors and all that and saying, hey, here's what we can afford. You come up with the price sheet, right? And they just negotiate a reasonable thing, and cut out a ton of expense out of it. Yeah. And it reminds me years ago, gosh, probably 15 years ago now, we worked on a project with some Amish back in Ohio, and they actually had a very similar system. Right. Of that community, I think you gave 10% of your income into this pool, and then they went as a group and went to the doctors and said, hey, we got you covered. We're going to pay you cash. Exactly. No paperwork, no nothing, just cash. And, do what you need to do. And and they've done it for years. You just cut out all the stuff in the middle.
Yep. You just hit on my solution, which I've talked about. And it's medical co-ops. Yep. So you have a huge group of people, like a whole city worth of people. And all those people are able to pay into a nonprofit cooperative agreement. There's no financial gain for an insurance company. There's no executive salaries. There's no nothing. And what that would allow people to do is essentially interact directly with their physicians to get the care that they need, and then the co-op would pay it. There'd be no negotiation between the co-op and the doctor. The negotiation would be between the individual payer and the provider. Because I've always thought that the biggest problem that we have with our medical coverage is the disconnect between payer and provider. The only people
Absolutely.
that matter in that relationship should be those two people. It shouldn't be payer talks to provider, and then provider decides what to do for payer based on what the insurance company says. That's bullshit. That should never happen. But that's also why I don't like Mark Cuban's idea of institutions, corporate healthcare. I've thought for many, many years that corporate healthcare is actually sort of a problem because it creates a huge disconnect between payer and provider. So the
Right.
patient, you know, is not really in control of their healthcare. It's the company, whatever they think is, adequate for them to pay for. I mean, if you had an altruistic enough corporation that really just only cared about the well-being of its employees, it could work. But the problem is you're essentially turning the employer into the insurance provider. And so you still have the same sort of problems that are involved in that middleman with the insurance company. It's a different middleman. But the idea of co-ops where you have a truly enormous number of people paying into a system, and then that system can pay out, and the co-op could even hold on to some premium money to start building a like a war chest for when people get really, really sick, or if you have members that can't pay the full premium, they could be subsidized in part by people who are paying the full amount.
Right.
And you can have this cooperative system that involves such a huge number of people that as long as enough people in the pool are young and healthy, it could begin to
Right.
pay for everything else. But the key to it is it has to be non-profit. As soon as you try and take money out of the pool to pay for, exorbitant salaries or whatever, then it just becomes an insurance again. But I think co-ops could be the way to go.
Well, and I may misconstrue what he's talking about, but the sense I got was it was kind of trying to pool this large employee base, but and make it kind of a co-op within that environment. But I get your point on that, and the whole co-op idea makes a lot of sense. But I think it's one of those things where it's like, we probably need to try a few things, see what kind of makes sense, right?
Yeah,
And because what's we have now isn't working.
right. But
So I applaud him in the sense that, hey, at least he's trying to figure it out. He's already done the thing with the pharmaceuticals, whatever he calls it, cost plus pharmaceuticals. I don't know if you've seen that, but
Mhm.
he's got like 150 different of the most common drugs that you can buy, and they're like really inexpensive because he's working directly with the pharmaceutical companies. There's not these benefit managers in the middle,
Right.
and it seems that part, the drug part, seems to be working pretty well. So it's the same kind of theory.
Yeah. Well, price negotiation will always be an important part of it. But
Yep.
again, this is sort of like the idea of where the third party comes in, because if you have a political party that's actually dedicated to trying to get something done and isn't, beholden to special interests, which has been for years, then you can start incorporating new ideas. And as they say, if Mark Cuban has a good idea, hey, I'll listen.
Yeah.
If you think I have an idea, I would hope people would listen to me. And so it should be about ideas and the ability to implement those ideas, as opposed to, getting reelected or what kind of subsidy you can get from some sort of benefactor. And
Oh
so
yeah.
say that's why you need that's another reason why I think it basically an abundance of ideas is one reason to have more parties. But I also wanted to just throw in, because we sort of what we started talking about would be like the cycle of retribution. So you got Democrats that don't like the Republicans that don't like that. And so long as you're always just alternating between those two people, there's always going to be this cycle of retribution. The way you break the cycle of retribution is you elect somebody who's not part of the cycle. And then they just
Exactly.
say, I don't want, I'm not dealing with this. This is bullshit. It's done. God, goodbye.
Yep.
And then, but we don't have really the ability to do that. I mean,
Nope.
the next presidential race that comes along, whenever it is, I mean, unless there is a miraculous growth of a third party,
Right.
And it's going to be between the Republicans and the Democrats. And you're going to have Republicans who want to keep pounding on the Democrats, or the Democrats who are going to want revenge on the Republicans. And that's going to be who you're going to vote for. So until we can get some diversity into the system and we start getting, more points of view and people less beholden to retribution, we're going to
Right.
constantly see these terrible cycles of things. And you can see that it's just going to keep escalating. So it's not going to be good.
Oh no, it's not. It's not. And again, that's why starting at the ground level and kind of the local area that's the only place to start at this point. I mean, trying to think you're going to influence these national elections at this point is just a fool's errand in my mind.
Yeah.
So the best thing we can do is, hey, even if we increase the number of independents by 5 or 10% within Congress and the Senate,
Yeah.
that would be huge.
But I
That would
just
be
think that
huge.
what would also be huge would be an overwhelming number of registered independents or registered as declined to state. And I go
Yep.
back to that point. If we could get like registered Democrats and registered Republicans down to say 10% each and have, the rest of the registered population, the remaining
Yeah.
80% be independent, that would be sending a huge message. And it would be sending the kind of message that, you better get something done
Right.
or this huge mass of people is not going to vote for you.
Right.
Right now they always talk about turning out your base, and it's a base election. You have to turn out, the base of your supporters. At some point, there's got to be enough of a message that says your base just doesn't get it done at all. You need a big chunk of the rest of the people that are not your base, or you don't get elected. And if we could just get to that point, I think we'd be a lot better off.
Well, just getting away from the whole base election thing, I literally had this discussion with someone who will remain nameless at this point. That's complaining about the whole Trump world, which he is so low on my list of people I respect and all that. But at the same time, it's like, listen, he got elected because he did get more votes.
Right.
So you can complain about all the Republicans and that they're just unethical, terrible people. But the Democrats didn't turn out. There were fewer Democrats that voted.
Yep.
And that's why he won. So at some point, but to me, it was actually a positive thing in a way that if so many of those disaffected Democrats would say, hey, because so many, list your reasons why they didn't come out to vote. They were unhappy with the Biden thing. They didn't like Kamala. They didn't think Biden did enough in Palestine and all these, whatever. Well, whatever reason they got disinfected, it's only going to continue to do, those things are going to continue. There was a reason why Biden continued to support Israel, whether you agree or disagree with Israel, doesn't matter. Because I guarantee you, he had a lot of pressure put on him by certain parties to do that, to not move in a different way. And we can say that was either the right thing or a wrong thing, but if you're upset that he didn't do things, it's going to keep happening.
Yeah. And what I would say to your friends or anyone else who's doing the whole, well, I hate this person or I hate that person, if you don't want to keep voting for people you hate, make a new party.
Exactly. No, that's what I said. It's like,
right, let's make a new party where you can actually vote for somebody that you actually think is actually worthwhile or good.
Right. And I mean, I get it. And, but again, it comes back to the Jesus complex for me. It's like, I don't care what side you're on. It's like, if you're looking for somebody to solve all your problems because you feel powerless or whatever, okay, well, don't expect a whole lot.
Yeah.
You got to, and I'm not saying that this podcast is going to make a whole lot of difference, but at least trying to start spreading the idea that, hey, we need to come together in the middle because there's a heck of a lot more of us in the middle.
Yeah. Well, it kind of brings me back to sort of the way we vote for things and how we have to vote for things. So, like, first of all, the idea that the federal side of things is the thing that affects your life the most. Some people, I think, do believe that, and I generally don't. We talk about local elections a lot.
Right.
And then I go back to Karen Bass. So Karen Bass fiddled while Rome burned, and LA is in ashes. And my guess is, if I had to guess right now about the next mayoral election, one of two things will happen. They'll either reelect Karen Bass in LA, or they will elect somebody who is exactly the same, just like they did in Chicago. They got PO'd at the woman who was the mayor of Chicago, whose name I can't remember off the top of my head.
Yeah,
and then
right.
they reelected somebody who was exactly the same. I mean,
Yeah.
he might as well have been her clone.
Right.
And the thing is, it's like, we've got to get past that. I mean, if burning your city down isn't enough to get you kicked out, then what is? I mean, how far have people gone off to one side that they keep voting for the same, that they keep voting basically to let their city be destroyed? I mean, that's crazy.
Right.
I mean, I've had a lot of discussions with people about various things that Karen Bass has done, or where she's taken money, or why she's taking trips, or whatever. But I always keep coming back to the same thing. Is like, it's not enough that the city burned down. That's not enough to make you vote for somebody else.
Yeah.
And the thing is, the fact is that it will turn out that it's not enough. It just tells you that whatever we're doing in California and whatever we're doing in Los Angeles is not working. There has got to be a change. And it can't just be the same thing. It's like, well, maybe we'll vote for this person this time, or maybe we'll cross our fingers. And people's, their lives have been lost. Vast amounts of properties have been lost. It's only going to get worse as time goes on. And I mean, it's like,
no, it's terrible.
And we're not gonna change who we're putting in office. It's crazy. It's absolutely crazy.
Yeah, and you can look across the board on all those. It's just a lack of, I keep coming back, a lack of imagination in the political world. Yeah. And we can look at the LA situation. You can also look at, whatever the deplorable conditions in whatever, pick your southern state, Louisiana. It's like, okay, why is that continuing to happen, in New Orleans or whatever? Yep. So it's like, that's where it keeps coming back around. It's like, how do you get the vast majority of people who do want to see the right thing happen, but they don't take the action to just stop the madness? We keep electing the same people and nothing's changing. So stop the madness.
Yep. Yeah, as I say, I've been banging that drum forever, and I think people are beginning to sort of
I do
put around on it more. And there's sort of different ways of approaching it. The whole open primary thing, I think has potential. I go back to Los Angeles in the mayoral election. So the mayoral election in Los Angeles came down to Caruso and Bass. Caruso should have won because Caruso actually had a clue about things, and Bass is horrible. But Bass won, but they were both Democrats.
Yeah.
So even if it's like the way a new party emerges is a split of an old party, I'll take it.
Absolutely.
I would absolutely take that. Again, I think we mentioned this maybe on the last podcast, where it's like, maybe the new party that needs to be created is essentially an institutional party, the worst possible party I could imagine, but it acts as a purge from the other two parties to just purge everything into this one institutional party. And they can all get along great with each other, and hugs and kisses between Harris and Cheney. It'll be a kumbaya moment. Everyone will love it, and they can go off and be whatever they are, and maybe you can get something more out of the two parties.
Yep.
And then you can start to have more of an exchange of ideas, because the institutionalists will be the institutionalists, the conservatives will be the conservatives, and the progressives will be the progressives. And there can actually be start to be more of an interchange of ideas, rather than this person is Hitler, this person is Stalin. And it's like, I would take that. And I think that's actually possible. I think there's a small possibility that could actually happen.
Well, it's kind of a natural evolution. I mean, it probably has as good a shot as any, right?
Yeah.
And because it is a natural evolution, because you've got disgruntled people on all sides,
right?
And they're finally waking up to the fact that, well, maybe we need to change something and do something a little different. It's like, I think the general population's been there for a long time, but kind of going back to the whole brush clearing thing we talked about last week, it's like they feel that way, but are they going to do anything about it?
Right.
Probably not.
But as I say, I think we're closer now to seeing something potentially
Definitely.
happen than we have been before. It's like every few years something comes along where I'm sort of like it's getting close. It seems like that at least people are sort of moving in a better direction than they have in the past, and so I always have a little bit of hope. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't have a lot of hope, but I have some hope.
Well, I don't know. I'm somewhat a little more optimistic, only in the sense that because since I come from the Democratic world, um, that I do think of people on this side have been, they're feeling pretty disgruntled right now,
Mhm.
and it's like, okay, well, you do realize all the Democrats had a lot to do with what is transpiring.
Yeah,
You can't blame it on Trump and his followers solely. So if things kind of go awry or don't go the way you want, well, you got to this is a great time to do some self evaluation. I know I do it all the time because I'm trying to figure it all out. That, well, you kept true to a person, Biden, who I personally, up until this whole last reelection thing, I didn't agree with him on some stuff, but I respected him. I mean, he'd been around for a long time. He really tried to do some good things, but he should have never run for reelection. And then you're trying to swap out somebody at the 11th hour. It's like,
yeah.
hey, you can blame Trump and everything all you want, but you have to look at those two things and kind of take a little bit of you know of the damage.
And I would just say, on a closing note, that the Bushes and the Cheneys have a lot more in common with the Bidens and the Pelosi's than they have in common with the Trumps or the Sanders. So to me,
Absolutely.
purging both of those groups from the two parties, let them do whatever they want. And
Yeah.
then, as they say, you get kind of a Trumpy Republican Party and a kind of Sandersy Democrat Party, and then you have a Bush Biden
Cheney.
institutional party,
Right.
right? And it's like, but at least there starts to be some interchange right there. I mean, I
Right.
would still say that the Bush Biden coalition remains entirely worthless. But I think that you could have a good interchange of ideas between sort of a Trumpy Republican Party and a Sandersy Democrat Party. I mean,
Yeah.
I've said I'm conservative before, so I mean, my leanings would still be towards the sort of the Trumpy side of things.
Right.
But I don't think that there are only bad ideas on the left. I think that the concerns that actual liberals have about, you know, individual rights and protecting the minority and, a lot of things that they want to bring up and talk about are important to talk about. So if you could get an interchange of ideas, I think you could be all
Yeah.
right. But when you have institutionalists, running things on both sides, you just get garbage. So
Exactly.
hopefully,
Yeah.
I could envision something like that happening, which to
Yep.
me, as they say, I'll take.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
we'll see.
Absolutely. All right. Well, I didn't know where all that was going to go, but we're running over time. That whole healthcare really kind of got us off on a tangent there, but
Yeah,
it's
but I mean, it's hugely important. I mean, think
it,
about
it
the percentage of the economy that goes into healthcare. Hugely important.
it's probably, I don't know, it's definitely number one or number two,
Mhm.
depending on how you want to look at it. I mean, depending on how quickly you think the earth is going to burn down, I guess would be up there.
Yeah,
Depending on how many more wars we're going to get into,
yeah.
could
Or
get in there.
maybe Beetlejuice will explode and send a beam of gamma rays at us that just wipes out the whole planet. I mean, it could happen.
Who knows? But I mean, just everybody's individual health. I mean,
Yeah.
that literally impacts 100% of us. So
Yep.
it's like maybe a good place to start.
Yeah. It'd be great. It'd be good to see some movement on that front. That'd be good.
All right. All right. We'll check on you later.
Yep. So good to talk to you. See you next week.
Yep.